There is a unit inside the U.S. government where, if you die on the job, the government will publicly deny you ever worked for them. Not classified, not we can't comment, denied, on the record, at a press conference. These people travel on fake passports, use fake names, and operate in countries where the U.S. military legally cannot go. If captured, they're on their own. They are not soldiers. On paper, they are civilians. And yet, they were the first Americans inside Afghanistan after 9/11. Not the Marines, not Delta Force, these people. 15 days after the towers fell, while the Pentagon was still drawing up plans, a 7-man CIA team landed in a valley in northern Afghanistan with satellite phones, weapons, and $3 million in cash stuffed into a duffel bag. I'm going to tell you 7 facts about this unit that most people have never heard. Not the movie version, the real one. And I promise you, the real version is weirder, darker, and more consequential than anything Hollywood invented. Fact 1. They trained a private army in Colorado. Most people have never heard of the secret war in Laos, which is exactly how the CIA intended it. Laos in the 1960s was officially neutral, a landlocked country in Southeast Asia that wasn't supposed to be involved in the Vietnam War. The problem, the North Vietnamese were using Laotian territory to move troops and supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The U.S. couldn't send the military in without triggering an international crisis, so the CIA went instead. They recruited the Hmong people, a highland ethnic group whose territory sat directly on top of the trail, and built them into a private army. At its peak, 30,000 fighters, funded, supplied, and in many cases led in the field by CIA paramilitary officers who lived with the Hmong for years, called in airstrikes, and helped run combat operations in a war that officially wasn't happening. Here's the detail that stops people. The CIA trained Hmong guerrillas at a classified facility in Colorado, Camp Hale, a former World War II mountain warfare base sitting at 10,000 feet elevation. Tibetan resistance fighters were trained there too for a separate covert operation against China. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, in complete secrecy, the CIA was running a private military academy for foreign fighters. The Laos operation ran for roughly a decade. Then the United States withdrew from Southeast Asia in 1975 and left. The Hmong fighters who had been armed, trained, and given American promises of support were abandoned. Tens of thousands were killed by the new communist government. Hundreds of thousands fled. Many eventually resettled in Minnesota, California, and Wisconsin, where their descendants live today and know exactly what happened and why their grandparents left. This pattern, the CIA committing fully to an insurgency and then withdrawing when the politics changed, would repeat itself so many times over the next 50 years that it almost became policy. Almost. Fact 2. The cash worked better than the bombs. Back to Afghanistan, 2001. The 7-man CIA team that landed in the Panjshir Valley on September 26th was led by a 59-year-old case officer named Gary Schroen, who had come out of near retirement specifically for this mission. He later wrote a book about it. The title was First In. The team's most important tool wasn't their weapons or their satellite phones. It was the duffel bag. $3 million in physical cash. In a country with no banking system and a political culture built entirely on patronage and loyalty, cash was the most powerful thing the Americans could bring. Schroen's team and the paramilitary officers who followed distributed tens of millions of dollars in the weeks before any conventional military arrived. They were buying warlords,
literally purchasing the allegiance of Northern Alliance commanders who had been fighting the Taliban for years and suddenly had very well-funded new friends. The Taliban fell in 11 weeks. Kabul fell on November 13, Kandahar on December 7. A few hundred Americans and a few thousand Afghans, connected by CIA money, special forces coordination, and precision airstrikes, shattered a government in less than 3 months. The image that became the symbol of that campaign, CIA officers and special forces soldiers on horseback, riding with Afghan commanders, calling in GPS coordinates for satellite-guided bombs dropped from aircraft flying above the clouds. 19th-century cavalry tactics married to 21st-century precision weapons. The Taliban had no answer for it. It was, by any military measure, one of the most efficient uses of covert force in American history. And then came the moment that changed everything, and has never been fully reckoned with.
Fact 3. They had bin Laden and lost him. December 2001. The Taliban is gone. Al-Qaeda's senior leadership has retreated to Tora Bora, a cave complex in the White Mountains, close to the Pakistani border. CIA officers are on the ground. A small number of special operations forces are with them. They have Afghan proxy fighters. They are closing in. The decision is made not to use American ground forces to seal the mountain passes into Pakistan. The Afghan proxies are supposed to do it. They don't. Whether they couldn't or simply chose not to is still debated. Bin Laden walks into Pakistan. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee investigated this 9 years later. Their 2009 report is direct. Bin Laden was within reach at Tora Bora. The decision not to commit American forces was, in their assessment, a strategic failure. He wouldn't be found for another decade. The hunt that followed was almost entirely a CIA operation, a network of informants, signals intelligence, drone surveillance, and years of analytical work by people whose names are still classified. The thread that eventually led to the Abbottabad compound wasn't a gunfight or a dramatic raid. It was an analyst, purportedly a woman, who noticed something about the movement patterns of one of bin Laden's couriers, the way he traveled, the technology he avoided, the behavior that didn't match everyone around him. She tracked that thread for years. On May 2, 2011, 23 Navy SEALs fast-roped into a compound in a Pakistani city. 23 minutes on the ground. Bin Laden was killed on the top floor. Here's the detail most people don't know. Legally, that raid was not a military operation. The SEALs were operating under Title V authority, intelligence authority, not military authority. The CIA's director, Leon Panetta, was in command. The SEALs were, for the purposes of that night, CIA assets. The most famous special operations raid in history was, technically, a CIA mission. Fact 4. They ran an air war in a country we weren't at war with. Here's something that should be more widely understood than it is. For roughly a decade, from the early 2000s through the mid-2010s, the CIA conducted a sustained air campaign using armed drones in Pakistan's tribal areas. Predator and Reaper drones armed with Hellfire missiles conducting targeted killings against Al-Qaeda and Taliban figures. Not the military, the CIA. Pakistan officially protested every strike. Behind the scenes, there were arrangements, never publicly acknowledged, that gave the U.S. operational space. When those arrangements became public through leaks and investigative journalism, the Pakistani government was furious, partly because it was embarrassing, partly because the terms of the arrangement were more accommodating than they wanted their own population to know. The legal basis was a presidential finding, a classified document authorizing covert action.
No declaration of war, no congressional vote on the specific program, a signature. Hundreds of al-Qaeda and Taliban figures were killed. The civilian casualty count is disputed. Estimates range from the hundreds to over 1,000, depending on whose methodology you accept and the definition of civilian in a conflict zone where combatants don't wear uniforms. This is genuinely novel in modern state behavior. A civilian intelligence agency running a years-long air campaign in a country with which the United States was not at war. There is no real historical precedent for it. The program wound down as the drone campaign was progressively moved to military authority. But for a decade, the CIA had its own Air Force.
Fact 5. The program that came back to haunt everyone. The CIA's response, Operation Cyclone, becomes the largest covert program since Vietnam. Over $600 million a year at its peak, flowing into Afghanistan through Pakistan's ISI intelligence service, arming the Mujahideen fighters resisting the Soviet occupation. It worked. The Soviets withdrew in 1989 after a decade of fighting that cost them 15,000 dead and an empire they could no longer afford. Here is the part that doesn't appear in the celebratory version of this story. The CIA funneled most of its support through Pakistan's ISI, which had its own preferences about which Afghan commanders received money and weapons. The ISI favored the most Islamist-leaning commanders, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar among the worst of them, over more secular resistance leaders. The training camps that were built, the international volunteer recruitment networks that were established, the ideological legitimacy that came from a genuine military victory against a superpower, all of it stayed in Afghanistan after the CIA packed up and left. Osama bin Laden arrived in Afghanistan in 1979. He was not, this needs to be said clearly, a CIA asset. That myth is not supported by any credible evidence. But the infrastructure around him, the world he operated in, had been substantially shaped by a decade of American covert investment. When the Soviets left, the U.S. essentially stopped paying attention to Afghanistan for 10 years. The weapons were in country, the ideology had momentum, the networks were intact. CIA analysts who had worked the Afghan program spent the 1990s filing reports about what was growing in the country they'd helped arm. The reports did not produce the urgency they warranted. The invoice for Operation Cyclone arrived on September 11, 2001. Fact 6. The program that nobody wanted to talk about. After 9/11, the CIA was handed something it had never had before. Essentially, unlimited political support, a blank check, and a mandate to do whatever was necessary to prevent the next attack. What it did with that mandate became, a decade later, one of the most contested chapters in American institutional history. The Enhanced Interrogation Program, the one that included waterboarding, sleep deprivation, confinement in small boxes, and a menu of other methods, was authorized at the highest levels of the Bush administration. CIA officers and contractors carried it out in black sites, secret detention facilities in allied countries around the world: Poland, Romania, Thailand, others that remain officially unacknowledged. The CIA told Congress the program was working, that it was producing intelligence that stopped attacks. The Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation, released in 2014 after 5 years of work and access to 6 million internal CIA documents, concluded differently. The techniques were more brutal than reported. The intelligence produced was not as significant as claimed, and the program had damaged relationships with allies, who in some cases only learned what had happened on their soil from the newspaper. The CIA disputed every major conclusion. Here is the thing that doesn't get said enough. Both things can be true simultaneously. The people who ran the program genuinely believed they were preventing mass casualty attacks. They may have been right about some of it, and the program may still have been illegal, counterproductive,
and a stain on the institutions that ran it. Those aren't mutually exclusive positions, they're just uncomfortable to hold at the same time. The black sites are closed now. Some of what happened in them is public. Most of it isn't. No one was ever prosecuted. Fact 7. The same pattern 50 years later. Syria, 2013. The CIA launched a program called Timber Sycamore, covert support for Syrian opposition groups fighting Bashar al-Assad's government. Weapons, training, money, run through facilities in Turkey and Jordan. At its peak, one of the largest covert action programs since the 1980s Afghan operation. If that sentence produced a feeling of recognition, it should. The program ran for 4 years. Weapons flowed in. Some of them ended up in the hands of groups the U.S. wasn't trying to arm. The opposition fragmented. The strategic situation became a tangle of competing interests: Turkey, Russia, Iran, multiple rebel factions, ISIS, that no covert program could meaningfully simplify. In 2017, the Trump administration shut Timber Sycamore down. The people who had been receiving American support were told it was over. Laos, 1975. Afghanistan, 1989. Iraq, various moments. Syria, 2017. The geography changes, the partners change, the stated objectives change. The ending doesn't. Here is the question that all of this points toward. The Special Activities Division, the Special Activities Center, whatever it's officially called right now, wherever its people are operating tonight, exists because democratic governments sometimes decide that the rules they publicly espouse don't apply to everything they do in the dark. That there is a category of necessary action that cannot be publicly owned, publicly debated, or publicly accounted for. And maybe, sometimes, that judgment is correct. There are almost certainly things that did not happen, attacks that were stopped, weapons that didn't reach the wrong hands because of operations that will never be in any official record. The people who do this work believe they are protecting something real. Many of them are right. But the ledger has another side. The Hmong community in Minnesota knows what's on that side. The Tibetan fighters trained in the Colorado mountains know it. The Afghans who rode alongside CIA officers in 2001, whose country is now ruled by the Taliban again, know it. They know what America can do when it's committed, and they know exactly what happens when it stops.